Therapy's Better Health, where we journey into the heart of healing. I am your host, Shreya. Today's guest, Dr. Flavio Souza, isn't just a relationship expert, he's a mystic scientist, best selling author, and a transformational healer who guided over 44,000 people back to themselves. From heartbreak to hypnotherapy, from neuroscience to chocolate alchemy. Yes, chocolate. Flavio brings an astonishing blend of wisdom and wonder. If love ever felt like a puzzle, this conversation might just be your missing piece. So, welcome, Flavio. I'm honored to have you on my show.
Thank you so much, Shreya. I love being here. I love your work. I've heard several of your podcasts. I love the way you interview. And by the way, the introduction was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your kind words. And so, Flavio, you describe love not just as a feeling, but as a spiritual structure. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, great question. So, ever since the 17th century or so, people have been understanding the idea of love in terms of romance. And romance is a feeling that we catch. I meet a woman and I think she's so pretty. Suddenly, I'm in love. And we all want that feeling, that sensation. It's almost like a bodily sensation. We get the butterflies in the stomach. We're so impressed every time we think of the person, and we call this romantic love. And we all love that sensation, except for the fact that if you talk to anybody who's experienced it, and I think most people have, it doesn't seem to last very long. In other words, at some point in the process, there's some degree of conflict that erupts, which is completely normal. And then things have to be worked out. And in some cases, couples kind of achieve an equilibrium, if you will, or they split up, or they live in perpetual fighting and conflict and ignoring each other. In other words, that romantic feeling tends to break down. So clearly, if love is this eternal idea that comes from the soul, romantic love or the romantic feeling cannot be it. That cannot be love itself. It's a wonderful sensation. It's no different from eating a good dessert or experiencing sensual pleasure. And of course, it's really good, but that cannot possibly be what love is. And what I mean by structure and everything else, the way I have been understanding love, and by the way, I want to say this, I do not identify as a teacher of love, as I identify as a student of love. I'm trying to learn like everybody else, right? But the way I currently understand it is when we think of love in romantic terms, we're typically thinking in terms of what the other person can produce within me. In other words, looking at you makes me feel good. So it's mostly about getting something from the other person. Whereas I think that real love is mostly about what we feel like giving to the other person. So when you meet a person and you have this profound and intense desire to make their lives better, I think that that's much closer to what real love is. And for people who are parents, it's interesting because not to confuse, the idea of romance and sexuality with parenting, but I think that in terms of real love, oftentimes we can identify with the idea of real love more closely when we think of children, in the sense that we don't really expect our children to give us much, and we feel like giving them a better life. So I think that it's a model that can allow us to understand the idea of love a little bit better.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And that's such a profound reframe. And thank you for explaining and expanding love beyond just the emotion into something foundational and enduring. And also, how does this shift how we show up in a relationship, especially during conflict?
Well, yeah, thank you for that. So I think that this shifting perspective of what love is automatically, in my view, includes a balance between pleasure and conflict resolution. And I don't think that conflict necessarily means fighting or screaming, nothing like that. But conflict arises naturally because when we feel in love, the feeling that we have where time seems to stop and I cannot think of anything else but you know, that kind of feeling that most people have experienced, we could say that what's actually happening there is this idea of the ego boundaries. In other words, the boundary of what separates me from you, those ego boundaries have been dissolved. And this is what accounts for the person feeling at one with the universe. When they're in love, they become more generous. Health improves. We're in love with everybody. We change the way we behave toward other people as well, not just the object of our love or the person we're in love with. So at some point, the ego or the part of us that represents what I call the I, who I am, that part of us sort of rebels a little bit and says, wait a second, there has to be a distinction between you and I. And we call the distinction boundary. So as those boundaries begin to reform in a relationship, conflict naturally arises. So suddenly, what you think might be different from what I think, and suddenly you want to do A, I want to do B, and in other words, conflict is inevitable. So I think in a healthy relationship, in healthy love, there is an amount of pleasure, a certain amount of pleasure in terms of feeling good with the person, obviously, but there's also a certain amount of work, because the work is the work of reestablishing boundaries and growing up. I think we all need to grow up. None of us is fully developed, and none of us have arrived, and none of us are there yet, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be on this earth. So there's a lot of work to be done. And when the ego screams for boundary definition or redefinition, we're really dealing with immature parts of ourselves. We're dealing with the parts of ourselves that are not very loving. So working that out with our partner, I think, is the work of love that makes the relationship well balanced and actually productive.
Yes, that's so amazing. And you have also helped thousands people heal from heartbreak. What's the most common myth about emotional recovery?
What is the most common? What? I'm sorry, we broke up a little
Uh,
bit.
yeah, you have helped many people about heartbreak to heal
Yeah.
the heartbreak. And
Yes.
what's the most common myth that we have about that emotional recovery from heartbreak?
Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah, that's a profound question. Thank you. By the way, I love your questions. Like listening to your podcasts, you ask really, really perceptive questions that I think are useful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think the most common myth is that time will heal the heartbreak. That is not true. So I come from a background in hypnosis, hypnotherapy. Within the field of hypnosis, regardless of what your religious beliefs are, if you do enough hypnosis, you're going to come across a concept that people define as past lives or reincarnation. Now, I know that for some people, that idea is wrong. It cannot possibly be. The Bible doesn't support that. Depending on a person's religious traditions, whatever, some people find that to be a natural idea. Some people find to be repulsive, and I respect people's beliefs. But if you do enough hypnosis, you're going to come across instances that are very much highly suggestive of reincarnation. People begin to talk about things that don't belong to this lifetime. Oh, I was riding my horse to work. I don't ride a horse to work, so what am I talking about? So when you begin to investigate that more deeply, you realize that in the person's mind, they are experiencing something that we would call past lives. So here's the thing: when there's heartbreak, we'd say, well, time will heal you, and time doesn't. When you do enough hypnosis, you're going to see that some of the heartbreak that we're experiencing today actually started 1,000 years ago in a past life.
Yes.
So time does not heal. The only thing that time does is we bury the pain at the level of the unconscious, and it remains in there. It might show up as an illness. It might show up as another kind of conflict in our lives. but it's in there. It hasn't been resolved. It
Mm.
has to be dealt with. So time does not heal. And most family members and friends, meaning very well, they'll tell you, "Oh, don't worry, you're going to time will take care of it, and will make you perhaps forget about it, but it
Yes.
won't heal the pain." So I think that's definitely the biggest myth. Time does not heal it.
That's such a powerful myth to unlearn, that time doesn't always heal. We just bear the pain with us, and that's so true. And also, um, let's talk about the chocolate love alchemy. So tell us about the chocolate love alchemy, and how did chocolate become a metaphor for emotional connection?
Yeah, so I had myself a big heartbreak, a few years ago, and I was kind of attempting to reinvent myself. So I believe in God and praying, dear God, give me a new sense of direction and so forth. And then I realized that oftentimes our mission is in the area of our lives where we have the biggest problem. In other words, I never had a problem at work, but I've always had problems in relationships, in my personal relationships, not at work, but in relationships. So I realized that my biggest mission is in the area of relationships. Now, ironically, in therapy, I do extremely well working with people who come to see me for relationship problems. I enjoy their work, and people get excellent results. But I was always shy about advertising myself as a relationship hypnotherapist because in my personal life, I feel like such a failure. In other words, I've had 2 divorces, I never thought I got that relationship thing right. So I always thought that it would be inappropriate of me to announce or to publicize the idea that I work with relationships, even though I kept doing it. People would call me
Mm.
and I would work with them, but I never advertised that idea because I felt that I was not successful in my own relationships, right? Until one day I had a revelation. And in my belief system, it's as if the Holy Spirit was talking to me. It's metaphorical, but I kind of felt the
Yes.
inspiration that I had to work precisely in the area where I had the most trouble. So I happened to have a trip scheduled to Belgium and I took a class on chocolate making. I went with my sister. And when we left the class, we were discussing, wow, this is so much fun. We learned to make chocolate and she says, well, you can, she knows that I'm a teacher. I love to teach. And she says, well, you can teach that. And when she said that, it was almost, I got it instantaneously. I said, no, it's not quite about the chocolate. It's about love. And what I'm going to do is create an event in which people come over. Yeah, we make chocolate, but it's really a group therapy and alchemy. We're going to help people overcome the part of themselves that is not working so that they can open themselves up to real love. And so it is a blend of therapy, alchemy, group experience, and of course, all under the idea that we're making chocolate. So we make chocolate as a almost as an excuse to get together, if you will. But what's really happening there is at the same time we're doing kind of therapy. It's not formally therapy, but
Mm.
I am talking the whole time and facilitating an inner transformation. And we're just getting started with that project. I really want to expand that into a different kind of dating opportunity. I'm looking for people who want to collaborate and work on this project. I think it's really awesome, and everybody I've discussed it with so far is loving it. It's a nice way of getting to know one another uh, in a way that is pleasant, but also
Mm.
real, and that's what people like about
Yes.
it.
That's so wonderful. And uh, first of all, that's unexpected and a very rich metaphor. And secondly, the way you transformed your weakness into the strongest point yourself. That
Oh,
the heartbreaks of yours could be the weak point of yours, but you just make that a very strong point of yours, and you are helping people uh, for that. And this chocolate love is really a very cool and nice concept. And the plans you have for future, they are really awesome. So just best of luck for you also. And what deeper truth comes out when we use our hands and senses to reconnect with our hearts.
I think the deeper truth is that we all live with a ton of negativity inside of us, whether it's shame, guilt. We all do for different reasons.
Mhm,
I lived with that shame of not being happily married, in
mhm.
talking about relationships and love professionally, but not being successful in that area. I lived with shame for that reason. And so I'm no exception to all of this. But I think most people that I worked with, and I've worked with quite a few people over almost 30 years now, and everybody carries pain and shame and guilt inside at the level of the unconscious. And what I would love to be able to do is remove that from everybody. I think that, that's what my mission, what my quest is, what I want to do, because we could all be way better if we could only remove the negativity from within. So the few people that I've had an opportunity to work with, I mean, a few thousand people is nothing in terms of the planet, but I want to be able to expand this and help other people remove the load that we carry inside so that they can flourish and become who they really are. And all of us are way more than we think we are.
Yes, yes, that's so wonderful. And also you work with many high achievers. Why
Yes.
do they often struggle most with intimacy?
Well, it's an interesting thing. The higher achieving a person is, the more they want to achieve. In other words, a person doesn't become a high achiever accidentally. There's no such a thing. These are people who are driven. They pay attention to details. They work hard. They want to grow. They have a growth mentality. They want to grow and they want to do better in every area of their lives. And if they're not going to be doing better, they don't get involved in something. So if they're not going to be a great tennis
Yes.
player, they don't play tennis. In other words, high achievers, if you pay attention to any of them, they're not people who do things in a mediocre way. They want to do everything they do really, really well. So if they're going to invest some time in having a relationship with another human being, they want that time to be very productive. And what does that mean? Well, they want that relationship to be awesome. They want to have a good time. They want to grow. They want the relationship to be fruitful, productive, right? And sometimes we find difficulties, but they pay attention to details. They want more. That's precisely why they're high achievers. So, what we discover is that just like everybody else, we come up against limitations that we all have inside. They found the same limitations in their business lives, but they overcame them. Sometimes we can overcome certain limitations by using willpower alone and working really hard at it, but other limitations we can't. We need external help to enter the unconscious mind and unhook ourselves from our own problems, right? So in some cases, those individuals come to see me and I help them release something that was holding them back. And then the relationships can flourish. And sometimes even the relationship in the business world can flourish because sometimes a personal problem can actually affect their business as well.
Yes, yes. That's such a eye-opening truth. And thank you for revealing how success can sometimes become a shield against vulnerability and real closeness. And
Absolutely.
do you- yeah, and do you think success can actually isolate us emotionally even while elevating us socially?
Do I think that people isolate emotionally? Sorry?
I mean, success. Do you think that success can isolate us emotionally while it's just uplifting us socially?
Well, not necessarily. I think that nowadays we have uh, a brand of successful person who is much more balanced than perhaps one generation ago. I think that in the past, you had this prototypical person who was quite successful and wealthy, but he or she was isolated and lonely, miserable, and maybe even an alcoholic, but very successful at work. I think that nowadays the model or the idea has shifted. If you look at the younger generation who's quite successful, they have very balanced lives. They like to travel, they enjoy a good life, and they do value very good relationships. So I think that the model has shifted, and we now realize that even in terms of productivity at work, good, healthy relationships make a huge difference. So I'll tell you quickly, in medicine, there's a whole field of medicine called lifestyle medicine. And one of the things we study is this idea of longevity. So within the notion of longevity, from a medical perspective, there's a subset of studies that have to do with what's called the blue zones. Blue zones are regions in the planet where people routinely live past 100 years. So, Okinawa, Japan, and a few other places in the world where people routinely live very long lives. So, researchers have studied those populations and asked the question, how come these people live so much longer than the other people? What's going on here? And there are a number of factors, and there are a number of books and studies on this topic, and you can read all about the Blue Zone Project. But one of the factors that they have definitely identified in those groups is that people have better relationships. So today we know better relationships is intimately connected with quality of life, longevity, and even finances. People do better financially when they have better relationships.
Yes, yes, and that's really a very nice thing also, that if we have a good relationship, we can really flourish our lives in
Yeah.
every way. In every way. That's so true, and thank you for sharing that with us. And also, for someone listening right now feeling disconnected or betrayed, what is one truth they can hold onto today?
The one truth I would say is don't give up. No matter how desperate a person could be right now. If you're in pain, perhaps you're listening to me right now and you feel broken. Perhaps you're listening and you feel desperate. Perhaps you're listening and you feel that nobody loves you or that you don't love anybody. Perhaps you feel very lonely. I certainly understand all of those feelings. And I'm asking you to not give up. In other words, keep on going forward, keep on exploring, keep on searching, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. You will find what completes you, what fulfills you. You could not possibly have been born into this planet simply to suffer. That cannot possibly be the answer here. So, if we start with the assumption that you were born to be fulfilled and joyful, and if we're not experiencing that right now, don't worry. Let's keep on looking for the right answers because we're going to get there. So please don't give up. Let's keep on going. Let's keep on searching, and you will find what you're looking for.
Yes, yes, that's such a grounding offering, and thank you for reminding us that even in disconnection, we are still worthy of love and reconnection. And also, I have a I mean, this is my curiosity also. How do they begin rebuild the trust both in themselves and in love?
So, when a person feels broken, when a person feels devastated, when a person breaks trust and nothing seems to be real to them anymore, what I tell them is let's begin with the most obvious thing, and let's rebuild or build up your physical body. That's a good place to begin. In other words, take care of your health. Let's eat very healthy, and let's exercise. Let's do whatever it takes to improve your physical health. That's the first step, because when we feel lost, we really don't know where to begin. And the most obvious and palpable place to begin is the physical, because it's very difficult to tell a person who feels broken to meditate deeper. They can't meditate. They feel broken. They cannot sleep sometimes. So I encourage people to do is to think about their physicality first and not to stop there. I'm not saying that's all there is, but I'm saying let's begin right there. So let's take care of your health. If you haven't been to the doctor, go to the doctor, go to the dentist if you haven't been. In other words, begin to take care of your health and build up your body. No matter what your age is, you can always exercise more. You can eat more healthily. In other words, build up your health, build up your strength, build up your body. And as you're doing that, we're going to include the mind. We're going to change what you read and therefore what you're feeding your mind. Because just as we feed the body through food, we're also feeding the mind according to what we read and what we listen to. So feed your mind with healthy ideas. And then we're going to get to the spiritual side of things, which has to do with the purpose for your life. None of us was born for no purpose. There's a purpose for your life. Everybody has a purpose. You who are listening to us, there's a purpose for you as well. And the greatest adventure in this life is for you to discover what your purpose is. We all have one. You do too. So discover, we're going to explore that. And that is the greatest spiritual adventure ever, to discover your own purpose and exercise that purpose.
Yes, that's really very sweet. And also I think love itself is a very beautiful feeling, and your words made that more beautiful. As chocolate. Sweet as chocolate. So,
Mhm.
if my listener, after listening to this podcast, this very sweet podcast, if they wants to connect with you, what's the best way?
Well, the best way, I had books on Amazon. I have a major novel. I have some bestsellers there. On Amazon, you can find my name. But also, if you go to awesomerelations.life, it has my website, and there's a ton of information there. And if you need to, if you'd like to continue this conversation in person, if you're listening to me right now, there's a button there you can click, schedule time with me, and I would be very happy to communicate with you. Awesome Relations, one word, awesomerelations.life. And I'll be happy to continue talking with you. And I hope to be useful.
Yes, and I will make sure to attach all the details and all the links below so that our listeners can find them easily. And with that, we have come to the end. So, listeners, Dr. Flavio Souza shows us that healing isn't abstract, it's actionable. And love, it's something we've built, shape, and grow into. If this episode stirred something in you, don't brush it off. Let it guide you inward. The peace, the love, the health, it all begins with how you choose to relate to yourself. So stay gentle, stay curious, and keep choosing love.